3 minutes. That was the countdown the judge gave before declaring the trust fund dissolved. The courtroom air was heavy with the August heat wave, sweat dripping down my collar. Daniel leaned back on the bench, smirking like he had already won. My daughter sat beside him, head lowered, avoiding my eyes. Around us, lawyers whispered, paper shuffled, the green glare of the courtroom lamps unforgiving. I gripped the stamped envelope tighter, my only weapon still hidden from view. Daniel whispered loud enough for me to hear. 77 years and nothing to show. Guess Margaret married the wrong man. The name of my late wife sliced deeper than any legal ruling. My fingers brushed the embossed flap of the envelope, its texture both fragile and indestructible. He believed my silence meant defeat, that age had dulled my edge. The judge tapped his pen twice, calling for order. But that was only half the truth. The townhouse I once called home had already been sold, proceeds siphoned by Daniel under the guise of management. They celebrated last Christmas with champagne bought from my savings while I spent the night alone. That betrayal tasted bitterer than the cheap soup I warmed over the stove. My daughter laughed then, lifting her glass to Daniel's toast. Tonight she sat silent, her hands fidgeting, betraying a trace of guilt. The trust fund, though, was their true prize. The clerk fanned himself with a stack of papers, a stifling air making the courtroom feel like a furnace. I listened as Daniel's lawyer painted me as senile, unfit, a relic clutching outdated law books. Each word struck harder than the last. Yet my training never abandoned me. Every insult they hurled was ammunition I quietly catalogued. The stamped envelope pressed against my palm, its contents prepared months ago in foresight. They thought the fight was over. The judge leaned forward, spectacles catching a harsh light. "Final objections before dismissal?" he asked. Daniel chuckled and stood. "Your Honor, it's time the old man accepts reality. He's dragging us all through unnecessary paperwork." The laughter in the room was cruel, echoing against marble walls. My pulse slowed, a strange calm overtaking me. I rose slowly, joints stiff but voice steady. "I do have one objection," I said, eyes never leaving Daniel. Silence fell like a curtain. Daniel's smirk faltered for a split second before he masked it with arrogance. "Objection?" he sneered. "On what grounds?" The lawyers leaned forward, scenting drama like vultures circling carrion. My daughter finally looked at me, her lips parting as if to speak, but nothing came. I placed the stamped envelope on the polished oak table. The sound was small, but in the charged silence, it cracked louder than a gavel. That was only half the truth. The memory of Margaret brushed against me in that moment, her steady hand guiding mine as we drafted the original trust years ago. She insisted on safeguards, her foresight sharper than mine. That envelope was her echo, her warning not to trust Daniel's smile. The court clerk raised an eyebrow, curiosity overcoming fatigue. Daniel shifted in his seat, whispering harshly into my daughter's ear. The heat pressed in, but I felt a sudden draft of cold clarity. I had watched Daniel practice his victory speech days earlier, overhearing him on the courtroom bench as he rehearsed lines. "By Monday noon," he had bragged, "the old fool will be stripped of every cent." His arrogance was my advantage, his words now my leverage. I copied them down, time-stamped, notarized. He never noticed the janitor sweeping nearby was my friend. That overheard confidence would be his undoing. Betrayal has a way of leaving fingerprints. The judge gestured. "Proceed, Mr. Victor." My hands unfolded the flap, each crease deliberate, my voice low but clear. "This envelope contains the amendment to the trust, executed before any transfer Daniel initiated. It nullifies his claim entirely." Gasps rippled across the benches. Daniel sprang up, shouting, "Impossible." His lawyer scrambled through his papers, searching for a loophole. My daughter pressed her hands against her face, her shoulders trembling. But that was only half the truth. The stamped envelope bore a seal dated March 12, 2019, years before Daniel wormed his way into the financial accounts. My signature sat beside Margaret's, her handwriting still strong despite her illness then. The judge adjusted his spectacles, examining the document with solemn weight. Daniel's face flushed crimson, beads of sweat rolling into his collar. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Forgery." The clerk shook his head. "Authentic," he murmured. The tide had begun to shift. Daniel slammed his fist on the bench. "He tricked us," he barked. My daughter grabbed his arm, whispering, "Stop, you're making it worse." The green courtroom lamps flickered, as if feeding on the tension. Outside, the heat wave pressed against the windows, but inside, the chill of fear spread across Daniel's features. I stood straighter, my knees stiff but unyielding. "The law does not favor arrogance," I said. The judge nodded slowly, lips pressing into a firm line. I recalled the townhouse walls stripped bare by Daniel's decisions, family portraits tossed into boxes while he bragged about his investment skills. The same arrogance now painted his downfall across the courtroom. My daughter's hands trembled as she clenched her bag. I remembered Christmas night, her laughter over champagne while I stared at empty plates. That memory hardened into steel now. The stamped envelope was more than paper. It was a weapon honed from humiliation. The courtroom murmurs rose, whispers spreading like wildfire. One lawyer leaned to another, muttering he outplayed them. The phrase echoed in my mind like a gavel strike. Daniel shouted for recess, his desperation dripping through every word. The judge shook his head. Denied. Sweat rolled down Daniel's temple, staining his collar. The authority he once wielded in family dinners was gone. My daughter shrank beside him, shrinking under the judge's gaze. That was only half the truth. The trust document outlined in precise legal language that all assets reverted to me if mismanagement or coercion was proven. Daniel had signed supplemental agreements without reading them, his greed rushing him through the details. Each clause was a net, each line a trap. The judge read aloud one section, his voice steady. Any party exploiting the grantor through undue influence forfeits all claims. Daniel's gasp was sharp enough to slice the silence in two. Daniel's lawyer stammered, "This cannot be," but the judge raised a hand. "The document is valid." My daughter whispered, "Dad, I didn't know." Her words trembled, half confession, half plea. I did not answer. The weight of Margaret's absence pressed against me again, her foresight guiding this moment. Daniel glared at me, eyes burning with hatred. I returned his stare with the stillness of stone. Outside, thunder rumbled, though the sky was clear, an omen breaking through heat. The clerk recorded each detail, pens scratching against the ledger. Daniel's protest faded into sputters, his voice drowned by the authority of law. The stamped envelope lay open, its contents gleaming under the courtroom lamps. My daughter buried her face in her hands, shoulders quaking. The silence was thicker now, every breath measured, every heartbeat magnified. I stood still, a storm of betrayal behind me, the inevitability of reversal before me. That was only half the truth. At the edge of the bench, I noticed Daniel's fingers twitching, gripping the wood until his knuckles whitened. He muttered something about destroying everything, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. The judge called for order again, gavel striking once, twice, like thunderclaps. I inhaled the courtroom's stale heat, the scent of polished oak mixed with sweat. My hand brushed the embossed seal once more, feeling Margaret's echo in its grooves. Her voice lingered, reminding me to stand firm. Lawyers shuffled their papers nervously, the weight of precedent heavy on every mind. I glanced toward the back benches, where a few reporters scribbled notes, their pens racing. The story of an elder dismissed as senile, reclaiming victory, was already ink on paper. Daniel hissed at my daughter, "Say something." She shook her head, tears glistening. His voice rose again. "You knew!" But the accusation cracked hollow in the air. The courtroom lamps glared green, unforgiving and cold. The judge leaned forward. "This court acknowledges the validity of the amendment." Gasps burst across the room, like a tide crashing against the shore. Daniel's face drained of color, rage boiling beneath the surface. My daughter whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad, but I heard nothing past the ringing in my ears." Each heartbeat was a drumbeat, each breath a countdown. The trust fund was no longer slipping through my fingers. That was only half the truth. Daniel tried one last move. "Your Honor, this man cannot even manage his own townhouse." His voice cracked into a scream, but Judge's gaze hardened. "Mr. Victor's capacity is not under dispute. Sit down." Daniel sat slowly, his bravado shredded. The public presence of lawyers and the judge now bore witness to his unraveling. My daughter sank lower into her seat. My silence spoke louder than his tantrums. The stamped envelope lay open, undeniable as stone. The sound motif returned again, a dull ringing filling my ears. The courtroom air smelled of sweat and varnish, a suffocating blend. I straightened my tie, feeling its texture rough against my neck. Daniel muttered curses, his words sharp but powerless. My daughter avoided my eyes, her guilt unspoken, yet carved across her trembling lips. Each detail stacked like bricks forming a wall against them. Margaret would have smiled at this. Justice had a flavor, and it was bitter. A younger lawyer whispered to his colleague, "He built the perfect trap." The phrase traveled down the benches, feeding into the murmur. Daniel clenched his jaw, teeth grinding audibly. My daughter touched his arm, but he shook her off violently. The judge raised a brow at the gesture, noting every detail. I kept my gaze steady, my voice calm. "Your Honor, I believe this concludes matters." That was only half the truth. The storm not yet fully broken, Daniel's desperation escalated into wild accusations, dragging names and fabrications into the air. Each lie he spoke tangled tighter around him, exposing the depth of his deceit. My daughter finally whispered, "Stop, please." Her words carried no power. Her loyalty eroded under the weight of truth. I inhaled deeply, the courtroom heat pressing down like a heavy cloak. Yet within me, a strange lightness flickered, a release. Betrayal had forged my resolve sharper than any courtroom strategy. The judge scribbled notes. Lips pursed. The clerk handed him the final papers. Daniel leaned forward, eyes wild, whispering threats under his breath. I ignored him, my gaze fixed on the bench. My daughter sobbed quietly beside him, her tears staining the silence. The stamped envelope remained at the center, a symbol more powerful than his fury. The courtroom was no longer his stage. It was mine. That was only half the truth, and the end was near. The gavel struck, sharp and final. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Daniel slumped, fists clenched, teeth bared like a trapped animal. My daughter wiped her eyes, staring at me with a mixture of fear and regret. The stamped envelope, lying open, glowed under the green lamps as though it carried Margaret's spirit. I stood still, spine straight, every humiliation turned to stone under my feet. The legal dismissal had been reversed, but that was only half the truth. Daniel lurched to his feet again, voice raw. "This is collusion. He coached the clerk." The judge's stare flattened him. The room's heat pressed like a hand over every mouth. I gathered the scattered exhibits into a neat row, aligning edges as if laying rails. Order settles dust, and dust reveals footprints. The stamped envelope sat centered, an anchor. Daniel's lawyer whispered frantically, flipping to a tab section labeled contingencies. She had contingencies for contingencies, but not for humility. He tried a new angle. "We demand an immediate capacity evaluation." A murmur rose. I let the silence stretch, then answered with steel. "Motion noted and preempted by Exhibit H, 6 months of neurocognitive testing, results within normal variance." Paper slid across polished oak. Pens paused. The judge scanned, brow lifting. The green lamps hummed. Daniel's jaw trembled, teeth pressing a white ridge into his lip. He never prepared for verification, only for domination. Verification has a very long memory. From the back, a bailiff cracked open a door for air. Heat rolled in anyway, heavy as wet wool. Daniel's phone buzzed. He flinched, then brightened, thrusting the screen toward his lawyer. "File the emergency injunction," he hissed. They scribbled a note, slipping it to the clerk like a schoolboy's plea. The judge raised a hand. Counsel, you know ex parte filings during active hearing require extraordinary cause. Silence pressed. The envelope waited, patient as a tide stone. I remember the townhouse keys changing hands. Daniel's grin framed by a realtor's flash. He called it consolidation. I called it theft in a suit. He staged photos on a winter morning, breath visible, coffee steam curling from cups that were not mine. Now he tried to stage this courtroom too. But in here, angles matter. Timestamps, signatures, notarials. I slid forward a ledger of transfers, dates highlighted. A reporter's pen scratched faster, like a match on sandpaper. He pointed at my daughter as if she were a prop. We advanced him $40,000 in care. We deserve reimbursement. Her face folded. I met her eyes, saw the soft collapse under the weight of that lie. Show the bank wires, I said. Pages turned. The ledger coughed up odd withdrawals to vendors with names that sounded like shell companies, trying not to sound like shell companies. The judge circled 2 entries. The green lamp seemed to lean closer, listening. Noise returned, thin and nervous. A ceiling fan ticked with a barely audible click, like a metronome for panic. Daniel demanded a recess again. Denied. He demanded sanctions. Denied. He demanded oxygen, it seemed. Denied by his own lungs, which could no longer pace his rage. I tapped the envelope once, feeling its ridged seal. The motif steadied me. Paper, pressure, proof. Across the aisle, a junior associate mouthed a single word to another. Overreached. He was not wrong. Then came his gambit. We have a later amendment superseding his exhibit. A thin smile returned to his face, the kind a child wears before revealing a trick. A file appeared, poorly bound, ink too black, seal too wet. He slid it toward the clerk. The clerk did not touch it. The judge did, briefly, then set it aside, frowning at the gleam. Chain of custody? He asked. Daniel blinked. His lawyer mumbled. The ringing in my ear returned. I did not speak. I let the quiet carry his burden. The judge turned the pages slowly, nose wrinkling at solvent fumes that had not had time to fade. Who notarized this? He asked. A name none of us recognized, coupled with a seal number that did not exist in the state registry. I nodded once toward the bailiff. A phone call vaulted from the room, down a hall, into a database. Green light on wood. Sweat beaded and halted. His lawyer tried to pivot. Even if that filing is defective, equitable relief demands we protect the beneficiary spouse. The word beneficiary hung between us like a cracked dell. I slid forward Exhibit K. Spousal provisions already satisfied, receipts stapled, dates bolded. The fan ticked again, an impatient finger on a desk. Daniel whispered, "No, no, no," as if incantation could reseal ink. The judge stacked my exhibits at a perfect square. Geometry mattered. So did gravity. The bench creaked as the judge leaned back, eyes closing for a heartbeat. When he opened them, he looked 10 years older and twice as sure. "We will consider contempt for fabricated evidence," he said softly. The softness was worse than a shout. Daniel swallowed. My daughter flinched. The lawyers around us inhaled sharply, a chorus of paper lungs. Outside, a siren wailed and Dopplered away, leaving a vacuum that made every whisper feel like a trespass. The envelope listened. He went for character assassination again. He forgets names. He loses days. His lawyer nodded vigorously. I raised a thin folder labeled Daily Logs. "I forget patience," I said. A chuckle bubbled somewhere, instantly shushed. Inside the folder, calendars with inked squares, appointments kept, case summaries written in my tidy script. The judge's pen made a soft note in the margin. A reporter glanced up at me, as if seeing an outline click into focus. Not feeble. Focused. Daniel pivoted toward pity. We only wanted to protect our family. He was drowning. That word lodged under my ribs. Drowning is different from being pushed. I counted backward from 5. the same way I did when trial work threatened to steal my breath. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The ringing ebbed. I raised the envelope once more, setting it upright like a small flag. Protection is transparent. Theft wears perfume, I said. The lamps answered with patient green. At the clerk's nod, the bailiff stepped back in. Registry confirms seal invalid. Notary license expired 5 years prior. A hush flattened the room like snow. For the first time, Daniel did not speak. He blinked and blinked, a man counting exits that never existed. My daughter whispered his name, a plea wrapped in paper-thin hope. He did not answer. The judge squared the edges of the forged document as if it were something fragile. Then he set it face down. We were past defense now. We were into triage. Daniel's lawyer argued for time. Time had already spoken. The judge refused. I asked permission to submit a recording of statements made at the courtroom bench the prior week. Permission granted. The speaker crackled to life, carrying Daniel's casual boast about Monday noon and stripping me bare. The words sounded different when fed back to him by a machine. His face shrank around them. Machines can be very honest. For a moment, I felt the urge to look away, to spare my daughter the mirror. I did not. The arena was built for truth, not comfort. Heat drummed against the windows. The ceiling fan ticked its metronome. The stamped envelope stood at attention, a quiet sentinel. I thought of the townhouse stair rail, worn smooth by years of hands, and how he had listed it as a feature with price-inflating adjectives. Here, adjective did not inflate. Evidence did. The judge spoke with the measured cadence of a clock. Preliminary finding. Undue influence likely. Transfers subject to clawback. Court will appoint a special master to review. A groan rippled from Daniel as if someone had lowered a bar across his chest. His lawyer sagged to 2 inches. I did not exhale. Not yet. The midpoint is where narratives pretend to end. This one had teeth left. The lamps flickered once, a blink, then steadied. The metronome ticked on. Daniel gambled on spectacle. He clapped, a single sarcastic pop. Bravo, old man. The bailiff moved a fraction forward. I did not rise to the bait. Sit down, Mr. Howell, the judge said, voice dry as old paper. He sat, the wood complaining. I slid one last folder across. Insurance riders, the quiet spine of wealth. He had missed them. They never sparkle on social feeds, but they decide where money sleeps. The reporter's pen slowed, soaking in the angle. The smell of varnish thickened, sticky as a lie told 3 times. I rubbed the edge of the envelope, feeling the ridges, thinking of postage, distance, return address. He believed presence was power, that showing up loud could bulldoze signed ink. He learned otherwise. The judge cleared his throat. Counsel, do you wish to rebut Exhibit N? A pause. No, Your Honor. The pause said more. Even sharks know when blood is their own. The green lamps did not blink. I let my voice soften until it almost disappeared. Your Honor, there is one more matter. Heads lifted. Daniel looked up, wary. I tapped the envelope again, its flap still upright like a sail. The trust instrument contains a reversionary clause triggered by fabricated filings. The clause is self-executing. His lawyer flinched. He had skimmed, not read. Reading is a kind of love. Skimming is hunger. The judge angled the page toward the light. The metronome ticked once. For a heartbeat, doubt crept, the old enemy. What if the line fails, the hook slips? I breathed through it. The courtroom bench recording still hummed on replay in silent heads. My daughter wiped her eyes with the sleeve of a jacket she had not paid for. I straightened notes until corners met like clasped hands. Proceed, the judge said. I did. The clause read itself aloud in my memory, each word a rung on a ladder no one else saw. Daniel try humor, brittle as sponge sugar. So the paper beats the man. I met him with nothing. Paper remembers, I said. The room absorbed that line like a sponge. The special master appointment order slid from printer to clerk with a warm hiss. The heat outside pressed closer, that the air inside cooled, as if truth conditioned. The stamped envelope fell flat at last. Job nearly done. The metronome tick faltered, then resumed, stubborn as a pulse. His lawyer whispered about appeals, layering fantasy over exhaustion. Appeals need oxygen. He was out. I requested temporary restraining orders on all transfers, liens, and encumbrances initiated under the forged instrument. Granted. Gasps again, smaller this time, like the room had learned discretion. The judge signed with a fast, almost irritated stroke. He wanted this finished. The bailiff posted a notice on the board. Paper on wood, nail on fiber, sounds of a house being reclaimed in miniature. I felt the edge of fatigue, a small tremor in the hand that had been steady since dawn. I palmed it against the table, steadying with the grain. Daniel watched for that tremor, hungry for it. He would find nothing he could eat. The clerk handed me certified copies, warm from the machine, crisp as winter air. I slid them into a folder, tucking the stamped envelope beside them. Companion pieces at last. Outside a cloud finally veiled the sun. He tried one last needle. She chose me over you. The words floated thin and barbed. I did not look at her. I looked at the order, at the ink drying into permanence. Choice is measured by consequence, I said. The judge nodded once, as if to himself. Reporters capped pens, lawyers exhaled. The heat receded another inch. In the corner, the ceiling fan made a different sound, a clean whir, as if a bent blade had been knocked back into line. The judge set a final hearing date, 30 days hence, Monday noon again, as if the clock itself wished to witness symmetry. Daniel sagged. His lawyer gathered papers with the defeated choreography of a closing act. I stacked my exhibits, the stamped envelope on top, its job unfinished but certain. The bailiff called the next matter. Voices shifted, chairs scraped, perfumes mingled with varnish. A human soup of worry and relief. I did not move yet. I let the room change first. Daniel stood frozen, fists clenched so tight his knuckles blanched like chalk. My daughter tried to pull him toward the exit, but he yanked free, muttering curses under his breath. The public presence of lawyers, clerks, and strangers bore down on him like an audience unwilling to applaud. I closed my folder, slid the stamped envelope inside, and fastened the clasp. It clicked with finality, louder in my head than any gavel. The sound motif returned, steady and sure. The hallway outside the courtroom felt cooler, though the heat wave still pressed through tall windows. Reporters rushed past, eager to file. One paused, microphone raised, but I shook my head. Words in the hallway could not add to what the courtroom already carved into stone. My daughter trailed behind, calling softly, "Dad, please wait." I did not slow. Daniel's voice rose, harsh and frantic, but it broke against marble, like waves against a jetty. The tide had shifted down the corridor. I passed portraits of judges long gone, stern faces staring from gilded frames. Their eyes seemed to follow Daniel as he stumbled after me, his arrogance unraveling in ragged breaths. The smell of floor polish clung to the air, sharp and medicinal. I tightened my grip on the envelope. Margaret's name whispered through me again, a compass needle swinging north. She would have smiled at this. Justice earned not by noise, but by precision. At the courthouse steps, the noon sun blazed like a furnace. Cameras flashed, lenses capturing Daniel's red face and my steady stride. My daughter shielded her eyes, tears streaking down. The stamped envelope tucked against my chest felt heavier than paper, heavier even than law. It was history condensed, betrayal pressed flat, a weapon disguised as stationery. Reporters shouted questions about family betrayal, inheritance twist, shocking family secrets. I gave them silence. Silence tells the sharper story. The courthouse doors swung shut behind me with a hollow boom. Outside, the city noise surged. A chorus of car horns, heels clicking on pavement, voices colliding. Daniel lingered behind, flanked by his lawyer's nervous whispers. My daughter approached again, voice trembling. "Dad, I didn't know." The words scraped, raw and half-believed. I held her gaze for a breath, then looked past her, focusing instead on the horizon. The stamped envelope pressed steady against my heart, unyielding. The taxi slowed at the curve. I raised my hand, its leather seat cool against my back as I slid inside. Daniel shouted from the steps, a mixture of rage and desperation. His voice blurred into city clamor, lost to honking horns. Through the glass, I saw my daughter still standing, face pale, hands trembling. I tapped the envelope once, the sound muffled but resolute. The driver asked, "Where to?" I answered softly, "Back to the townhouse." It was mine again. The ride home cut through heap, asphalt shimmering like liquid metal. I watched storefronts pass, familiar yet altered, as though justice had shifted their outlines. The envelope lay across my lap, edges worn but steadfast. I remembered Margaret's handwriting on old drafts, the scent of her ink, the way she insisted on ironclad clauses. She had seen Daniel for what he was. Now her foresight sat beside me, proof that love survives as more than memory. The taxi pulled up to the townhouse, its brick face glowing red under the noon sun. Curtains fluttered in upstairs windows, ghosts of years past. Daniel had staged its sale as triumph, a trophy. Now it stood waiting for me, silent but unbroken. I stepped out slowly, envelope in hand. The driver nodded, sensing gravity. I climbed the steps, each one echoing Margaret's voice. Betrayal had brought me here, but paper, patience, and precision would keep me standing. Inside, the air was stale, dust dancing in thin shafts of light, furniture gone, walls bare but bones intact. I walked through rooms, fingers trailing over grooves in door frames where children's heights were once marked. Daniel had tried to erase me from this space. But erasure is never complete. The envelope weighed my pocket, not just with law, but with presence. My footsteps echoed. This was my arena now, and I was not leaving until it was finished. I climbed the stairs, knees aching yet steady. The master bedroom yawned empty, sunlight cutting across faded carpet. I sat on the windowsill, opening the envelope one last time. Inside, the claws gleamed, dry ink etched into permanence. Outside, the city pulsed, unaware of the war just won. My phone buzzed. My lawyer, confirming the restraining orders filed. Daniel would find no escape, no shadow to hide his theft. I exhaled slowly. The silence here was clean, almost sacred. In the kitchen, I turned the faucet. Water sputtered, then ran clear, cold. I cupped it in my hands, drinking deeply. The taste was metallic but real, grounding. Daniel's champagne had tasted like theft. This tasted like survival. I leaned on the counter, envelope resting beside me. Margaret's name surfaced again, quiet, twice, and no more. She was the compass. She was the reason the clauses held. She was here, in the faint hum of pipes, in the quiet. The day stretched, heat pressing against townhouse walls like a siege. I left windows open, letting faint breezes stir dust. The envelope sat on the table, its contents spread like cards in a winning hand. I rehearsed what came next. 30 days, Monday noon, courtroom again. Daniel would return, weaker but vicious. But I had more. Insurance riders, recorded boasts, notarized logs. Every humiliation he dealt me had become evidence. Every betrayal had ripened into reversal. Evening settled, shadows crawling across floorboards. I lit a single lamp, its glow warm, steady. The envelope lay flat, its job near done. I thought of the judge's pen strokes, fast and final. I thought of the reporters, already shaping headlines about elder justice, inheritance twists, shocking family secrets. I thought of Daniel, pacing in some rented apartment, rage eating through him like acid. And I thought of silence, which was finally on my side. Night came, cicadas shrilling outside a broken chorus. I moved slowly through the townhouse, each step reclaiming space he tried to take. The stamped envelope sat locked in a drawer now, its edges worn smooth by battle. Tomorrow would bring filings, interviews, and preparation. But tonight, there was only this: cool water in a glass, faint breeze through curtains, shadows long and forgiving. Justice does not shout. It waits, it steadies, it stands, and it never forgets. 30 days passed like sand through clenched fingers. Monday noon arrived again, the courthouse square simmering under the same relentless sun. Daniel appeared thinner, hair unkempt, his arrogance chipped to the bone. My daughter walked beside him, eyes hollow. I entered quietly, the stamped envelope tucked inside my briefcase. Lawyers shuffled, clerks whispered, lamps glowed green. The air was charged, expectant. This was the day the tide would not just shift, but break. The judge took the bench, his gavel striking once. Papers shuffled, echoing like distant thunder. Daniel rose to speak, his voice brittle, ragged. He claimed conspiracy, persecution, unfair targeting. His lawyer echoed the refrain, but even their words sounded tired, wilted. I opened my briefcase, withdrew the envelope, and set it on the table. Its sound cracked louder than any accusation. All eyes turned. The motif returned again. Paper, pressure, proof. I had brought more than survival this time. The clerk read aloud new evidence. Notarized transcripts of Daniel's oaths, fresh reports of forged filings, insurance riders he never discovered. Each word stacked atop the last, a tower of undoing. The judge's pen scratched rapidly, lines forming across parchment. Daniel slumped, head in hands, sweat dripping into the wood. My daughter whispered, "Please, stop," but her voice carried no reach. This was no longer a family quarrel. This was the law carving verdicts in stone. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed, tension pressed in like a storm cloud. Daniel tried to rise, to shout, but the bailiff pressed him back down with a hand on his shoulder. His rebellion had shrunk to tantrum. I remained still, envelope resting at my fingertips. Margaret's foresight hummed through the ink, through the clauses. My daughter looked at me, tears streaking her face. I did not look away. Betrayal has a face. Justice requires meeting it without flinch. The judge raised his gavel. This court finds for the petitioner. Assets revert immediately. All contested transfers void. Costs to the respondent. The gavel struck. The room exploded in murmurs. Daniel shouted once, wordless, then fell silent. My daughter buried her face in her hands. I stood, briefcase closing with a metallic snap. The stamped envelope slid inside. Mission complete. Without a glance back, I walked toward the door, shoes echoing across stone. The reversal was final. Cut